Okay. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not listeners. Yeah, no, we're fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Going to make a start now. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. I brought about 200 Insect AI leaflets with me, which you'll see out on the registration desk. I expect you all know what Insect AI is, but the idea is that you could take 3 or 4 home with you, and if you've got someone who you think might be interested, you can give them to them. I'd rather not have them to take home with me, so please do take some and share them when you get home. The excursion tomorrow has been confirmed as going ahead, so thank you to Alexandra and George for working that out for us. The meeting point will be at the fortress entrance gate, which most of you probably walk through on the way here in the morning. You go over to the pedestrian bridge, and then you cross the road, and then there's this ancient doorway you go through, gateway. We're going to meet there at 9 o'clock tomorrow for those who are doing the excursion. A note to all speakers, session organizers, and presenters that today we don't have much slack in the time schedule, so please keep strictly to time, or else we'll be in trouble with security at the end of the day for not leaving on time. We don't have as much wiggle room as we had yesterday. And then finally, please remember to sign the register. You have to sign the register every day, okay? If you think that you might have forgotten to sign the register on the previous day, today, this moment is the last moment to correct that mistake. And Aoife has all of the previous day's forms. So if you're in any doubt, you can ask Aoife and you can sign again. Okay, the Teams is running. We think everything is okay. So I'm going to invite Grace up to give our first presentation. Thank you, Grace. For the speakers for this session, I'll give you a squeak at 12 minutes. Okay, you've got 15 minutes total, so 3 minutes for questions. So I'll squeak you at 12 minutes.
Hello?
I'm going to squeak you at 12 minutes.
Okay.
If you go on after that, you'll be eating into your question.
Morning, everyone. I'm Grace Skinner. I'm an ecological data scientist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And yeah, our team now has experience deploying both automated and traditional systems on a range of projects. So I thought I'd just talk through a few of the kind of lessons learned, challenges we've experienced, and kind of what that means for survey design and how we interpret the data. So these are the systems I'm going to focus on. So for nocturnal insects, so moths, we've used both traditional bucket light traps. And then we've also used the LepiSense automated system, which is the smaller, cheaper kind of next iteration of the AMY system. And then for the diurnal daytime flying insects, we've used both pan traps and the insect detect system as an automated method. And to introduce the project that most of these comparisons are going to be focused on. We ran a project last year in the UK on farmland for about 6 months. We had 12 different farms, and we had one insect detect and 2 LepiSense per site alongside those traditional methods. So as a basic starting point, just thinking about what is an observation, what is a data point that we're getting from these systems. So ultimately, we're getting species identifications, but how we get to those species identifications is very different. So for the traditional monitoring, we've obviously got those in-person expert identifications of physical individuals, whereas your automated monitoring, we've got these images captured remotely and then employing AI methods to detect and classify them. And it's that difference that underpins all the comparisons that I'm going to talk about in the following slides. So firstly, in terms of data volumes, so we all know that these automated methods are making huge amounts of data, but I quantified this in this project. So we can see that because the automated systems can run without that sustained human effort, each observation that they're making is really low effort, and that means we can generate orders of magnitude more data. And so for this specific project, with the 2 LepiSense systems per site, we can get up to 180 nights of data compared to just the 12 nights that we got with the traditional moth traps, using 6 of them. Then looking at some differences in data resolution. So on the temporal side of things, this is where the automated systems really excel. We've obviously got this high frequency continuous sampling, so we can get a complete picture of how the moth population is changing, or the daytime insect population is changing over the season, compared to the traditional methods where we just get these snapshots. And taking that a step further, we get these within night activity patterns as well. So we can create plots like this and see exactly when different moths were active at different points during the night, compared to just, we knew that moth was active at some point during the night. For this project, I don't think there was much difference in the spatial resolution. There's no particular inherent advantage one method over the other, and it was more constrained by the logistics and budgets as to how many of each of these systems you could put out. On the taxonomic side of things, the traditional methods are returning higher species richness per sampling event, so per day or night, than the traditional methods. And that's because we've got these experts that can identify the rare and difficult taxa. And also they have access to those physical specimens and can use microscopes and dissection techniques to identify them. So the automated methods are typically returning lower species richness, but because they are recording for the whole season, that means we might have a higher chance of observing a rare or a transient species that's just not around very often and might be missed by those snapshot surveys. And so overall, there's a chance that we could get a higher cumulative species richness across the season. We also know that the taxonomic resolution, the gap between the two methods is also likely to decrease over time. So I've been doing an evaluation of the Naturalis NIA classifier on iRecord citizen science images. This analysis was done a few years ago, and we got these results here in terms of how many and what percentage the classifier was getting these predictions correct. And I repeated this year, and I can already see quite a big increase in these scores. So yes, this taxonomic gap is likely to decrease over time, but we can probably not expect the AI to ever match the expertise of entomologists. And I'd also expect these scores to be slightly lower for the images that we're getting from like the AMI systems and the LepiSense and the Insect Detect, mainly because there's just so much more variation in the image quality that we're getting from those systems. In terms of metrics, so it's interesting to think like what actually this data means. I think with traditional methods, we're kind of assuming that they're direct measures of abundance, whereas the automated systems, we're more looking at kind of a proxy for activity, because of that reason that insects can be imaged multiple times. And we often, when we then, with traditional methods, we also look at species richness, adding information on top of what we know just with the abundance alone. But it's interesting to think that maybe with automated methods that we might be able to just use the detections, and that could tell us similar things without even needing to go to species richness, just because of how much data we're collecting. And so as a first step for testing this, I looked at the data at different levels of data aggregation. So the number of detections over time and the number of species over time. We can see these trends are pretty comparable. And so, yeah, we obviously need a lot more testing of this, but it's interesting to think that using these systems could reduce that reliance on species richness, and also could change how we think about indicator species and how we're kind of getting inference on the greater ecological health of an ecosystem. So we could potentially get things like a nightly activity metric just based on the number of detections, and that could be a new indicator that we could use with these systems. I did a financial comparison for this project, and we can see that the LepiSense system is costing about twice as much as the traditional moth traps were bought for on this project. And that's mainly because of the additional labour costs on top of the component cost. But it's not really fair to just do a complete direct cost comparison. We have to take into account how much data we're getting in return for that. And so on this project, the traditional moth traps could only be run a couple of times in that year. So, and whereas the LepiSense and the Insect Detect could just be out for the whole season. And then thinking about some challenges and lessons learned across all the projects that we've worked with these systems. So firstly, on the hardware side, we know that the waterproofing is absolutely critical, and we often found that stability, so the systems were like leaning over or falling over in the field. So we need to make sure those anchor points are really strong. And the LepiSense in particular, we had a few issues with like transporting the pieces, and they had to be very carefully packed to make sure they weren't being damaged when we were transporting it to the site. So it'd be good if we could consider that early in the design phase. Probably the biggest data loss we experienced was because of power failure, either because the solar panels weren't sufficient or the batteries weren't holding their charge. So we lost quite a lot of data because of that. And also, in some cases, that led to the SD storage card actually corrupting and losing all of the data because of that for that system. And then even when the systems were on, we often had intermittent failures of image capture. So they just weren't taking images when we were expecting them to. And a couple of reasons we identified for that was the timing drift, so the system's not keeping time correctly, or just not picking up the camera, not realizing it's there, so not taking images. Probably most critical that we've realized throughout all our experiences is it's really important to have remote system health monitoring. So we often have projects which aren't local and we have to drive quite a few hours to get to these sites. And if we don't have that remote system health monitoring, we can't know that they're working, or in a lot of cases not working. And so often we would end up going to the field a few months later, realize it hasn't worked for months, and then that's lost us a lot of data. Whereas if we had this remote system health monitoring, we could have picked up on that a lot earlier and gone out in a more timely manner. And then possibly the last thing, probably the hardest to overcome, and probably the biggest constraint on how long we can actually just leave these systems out in the field, is the interference from environmental factors. So things like vegetation growth and plants growing up and blocking the camera, spiders building webs across the camera. And in the version of Insect Detect that we use, we had these coloured spots to attract the insects, and we found that colour faded over time and became less effective. So now we've used these two methods, we've kind of got a good picture of their kind of complementary strengths, from the high taxonomic resolution and the direct abundance measurements from the traditional systems, combined with that high temporal resolution and continuous scalable data we can get from the automated systems. And so using them together, we could get a more complete picture of biodiversity change. In terms of survey design, it's then really important to match the method to the question. So not just using both traditional and automated on a project because they're both available, but actually thinking where combining those approaches actually adds value. So maybe if you're more interested in species level patterns, you might lean towards the traditional approaches, whereas if you're more interested in those temporal dynamics, then the automated methods might be a better choice. And thinking about things around like the constraints you've got in terms of power sources and logistics, and then actually storing and processing that data. And then finally, in terms of actually analysing and interpreting that data, so the metrics aren't directly comparable, and it's a new approach. So it's giving us a new format of data on an entirely different scale. And so the analytical approaches that we use for traditional methods, we can't just assume that we can use them for these automated methods as well. And so we need to think about the new analytical approaches and indicator frameworks to be using with these technologies. So then if we're combining their strengths in the field, then we also need to combine their strengths in the data analysis. So it's really important that methods for integrating the data from the two sources in analysis is prioritized. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. That's getting perfectly to time. So we've got time for questions. Hubert.
How do you treat detections or tracks? Are they abundance? Are they activity? Are they biomass? What is that? How do you treat that in comparison to Or do you have a specimen that is abundant?
Yeah, so we've always gone with it's more of like a relative activity measure. We can't assume it is directly abundance because of the different ways that the systems collect that data. So yeah, that's going to be a challenge when